We are here at the end of the Combatives Summit down in Iberville, Mississippi, 2024.
Yeah, sounds about right.
This will be the second, I hope, of many of these things. This was an amazing weekend.
It was, yeah.
We were not sitting in front of the banner that you quickly took down to try to get out of here. So I'm not sure who we have back here, but
that's Hicks and Gracie.
There you go. Yeah. So Mr. Gracie's behind us, and and so it looks a little different than the other stuff. But this is going to be sort of a wrap up for what we've been handling. I don't know if this will be the last episode that we put out, but we've collected all kinds of episodes and conversations with literally some living legends, some very intelligent, exceptional people that are experts in their field, but are in continued, pursuit of that continued excellence. This has been a really fun time, and now we get to sit down for the last time this weekend and kind of cover some topics that are more in my wheelhouse with people that I think we'll enjoy the topic because it's in their wheelhouse too. It should be fun. So I've got Nick Delgadillo from Starting Strength. We're going to learn all about him today. He is the guest of honor. We've got our, basically he's a regular now on the podcast. I think actually, John, you've broken a record. Yeah,
that's what I do.
Aside from the crew that's actually part of the team that that's employed, you will have been on the podcast more times than any guest we've ever had. So, and I'm not complaining. Yeah. I'm just saying, congratulations, maybe more or less.
What an honor.
And then my partner in crime, CeCe English, who joins me at least once a week, and she's been gracious to join us actually on 2 episodes while we're here. So, for some perspective. So. Anyhow, I'm stoked to talk about this. We're going to get into Nick right away. So I am going to give you kind of the go-ahead.
All right.
To give us kind of the quick rundown on who Nick is. This is my saying, and that is you get to start and finish wherever you want. You just have to maybe be a little bit patient with me because I might time you out to get some clarification or whatever.
Sure.
And then that'll get us going, and then this will lead us right into all the questions that I have, and I'm sure some questions I didn't have. So.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of how we always start, and I try to keep it as brief as possible. I'm a lifelong coach, so coaching is my thing. I started really messing around with fitness stuff as a result of teaching self-defense. I was teaching Krav Maga for a lot of years.
Okay.
So I was teaching conditioning classes and fitness classes at the Krav Maga school. So I lifted in high school for football and stuff like that, did barbell stuff, played football, played rugby. So, sports.
The big, strong power, speed stuff.
Yeah, sports my entire life, right? So anyway, I got into Muay Thai, got into submission grappling, eventually got into teaching individuals, like regular individuals through Krav Maga. And I always bring that up because it's like, I think formative for me as a coach and an instructor, because at the time, and this was around 2005, Krav Maga was, I don't know if it's still huge, but it was really popular at the time. So everybody wanted to do it. Normal people walking in off the street because they saw J-Lo in the movie and they wanted to learn self-defense.
Is that really what spawned that whole thing?
Dude, well, it was part of it. Yeah,
okay.
It was featured in a movie that she was in.
Cinema, man.
And it just got super huge. Anyway, so I had the benefit of working with a lot of normal people who had never been in a fight, never been punched, never thrown a punch, and a lot of times never done anything hard physically, right? So like really, really formative for me. I became a really good coach over the years. And I kind of I think I had an affinity for coaching and teaching. I always loved doing it. So I was very critical of myself as an instructor early on, and was just always trying to improve in that kind of domain. So anyway, like fast forward, I very quickly decided that the Krav Maga thing was is cussing okay on this podcast?
Indeed, no filter.
Okay. Krav Maga, as I was learning it from the organization that I was affiliated with, was pretty much bullshit. And actually my instructor, I got to give props to him, Sam Sadeh, who's still running around in Phoenix teaching jiu-jitsu and stuff. And he kind of instilled the critical thinking about what we're actually teaching, what we're actually doing.
Right.
It's like, if we're teaching people self-defense, they got to know how to fight. So we sparred, all of our students sparred. And then the Krav Maga was the application, right? So a lot of the things that we do here, at least in my mind, started with that way of thinking about teaching self-defense. So anyway, back to the starting strength thing. So that stuff all kind of evolved. I started doing that in my early 20s. And I've been coaching people semi-professionally ever since then. And then when I was looking for fitness stuff, got into CrossFit heavily, like obsessed, at the time, again, they were putting out the best information that was available. Because the exercise science stuff was, and in my opinion, is still not very good. But CrossFit was bringing in from the nutrition side, like people like Rob Wolf,
right,
and Ripito and Mike Bergner and all these, basically anybody they could find who was a subject matter expert. So they took that subject matter approach to things, and then things went haywire with them. They got pretty silly. So I was looking for a certification of some kind. Starting Strength was branching off, doing their own seminars, and I was extremely impressed with Ripito's explanation of things. I hadn't heard anything in the fitness world explain that clearly and that logically. Really appealed to me. So that was kind of it from there. I just started using Starting Strength in my own training, in my clients' training, revamped the way I did conditioning and fitness classes. We're not gonna do an hour of just getting really tired. Like, we're gonna figure out ways to actually improve our performance, right? And then around 2011, I got certified through Starting Strength. It's a very pretty rigorous process, and started doing seminars about a year later. Then 2015, so that was 2012. 2015, I moved to Wichita Falls to work with Rip and Starting Strength full time, and then that's been it. In 2019, we started the franchise company, so we have franchise gyms around the country now. Coaches all around the world, affiliate gyms all around the world. So it's been crazy. So on top of that, I've been, I teach jujitsu. I own a jujitsu school with my wife. I have certifications from Range Master for pistol and shotgun. So all the shit that I love to do my whole life, I've figured out a way to make them my job.
Yeah,
so.
I love that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Starting Strength just from like a philosophy perspective, and then maybe a methodology perspective. Sure. You can explain that for people that don't know what that is.
Yes. Okay, so Starting Strength is a book. That's how it started. And it's a book on barbell training. So if I were to boil it down, then barbell training is relatively simple in conceptually. Right?
I would agree with that.
So it's squatting, pressing, benching, deadlifting, the Olympic lifts. Anything that's done with a barbell. So what Starting Strength, the book, is an analysis and an explanation for why and how to do those lifts in the most optimal way to produce a strength adaptation as efficiently as possible.
Okay.
So that's I think a fairly succinct explanation, but it's very dense. So what Ripito has done very successfully is think about strength as the primary physical adaptation that should be developed, because it aside from just specialized cardiovascular endurance stuff like ultramarathon, swimming, running, right. Pretty much everything else that we care about requires force production at some level, and actually requires fairly high levels of force production. So if you take all of the physical attributes that you can develop, athletic attributes that you can develop, you can, and this is kind of the typical approach, is to pick apart like the skills or the attributes that you need for your skill, and then train those individually. It turns out that getting stronger actually elevates your entire baseline, right, for physical attributes, and then you can pile on the additional physical attributes with more of a strength base, and it makes everything easier, right? So
just timing out right there. Yep. You just mentioned like most exercise science is not awesome, but there are some knowns, and what you just explained is very known. It
is known, yes, but somehow it doesn't come out in practice.
It gets misapplied.
It gets lost and misapplied for sure. Yep. For sure. Yeah, I don't know that many people will disagree with what I said about strength. Well, that's not true. Some people will, but especially when you put it in the context of athletic or performance or competition or game. Like all of a sudden things for some reason get very muddy and weird, and they shouldn't, right? And I'll get into more of that a little bit, but they shouldn't, because any complicated process should start at the most simple, basic, and general place, right? So if we can agree that strength is important, and strength is going to be the attribute that takes the longest to develop, most difficult to develop, takes the most resources, right? And also isn't limited by your, it's helped by your endowment, your genetic endowment, but it's not limited by your genetic endowment. Like things like explosiveness and visual acuity and all the other things that are important, but more skill based, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to have a hard limit on how explosive you are. And if you're able to make yourself more explosive, it's only because you can increase force production.
Strength.
You have very little effect on how quickly your motor units fire, right? So the thing that we can affect the most is our ability to produce force. So let's start there because it applies to everybody. Doesn't matter where you started. So let's start there, and then we run a process and we see where it goes, right? And then over time, yes, things are going to become more specialized. But this idea that you can start with something like balance training, getting on wobbly surfaces, and then work backwards into higher levels of performance or into building athletic attributes, it is pervasive and it doesn't work, right? And the other part, and I think you mentioned that you had watched my talk from last year. Yeah. The other part is all this kind of gets blown. The idea gets blown way out of proportion, proliferated by high level coaching and high level quote unquote coaching.
Yeah, in air quotes. Yep.
Because what you get is this high performer bias, where you have people who are born with very good genetics for athleticism, and they already bring that to the table. And then you can put them into whatever method you want, whatever thing you want to dream up.
And they excel.
And even if they don't, they're already high performers. So it doesn't matter, right? So you can convince yourself of anything at that point. So it's far more interesting to take people who are unathletic and make them perform well than it is to take somebody who is selected, right? Because there's always a difference between developing someone and selecting somebody. Mm-hmm. And that applies to everything, guys. Like in all of our worlds, like in the fitness world, in the shooting world, and in the fighting world, there is a significant difference between a coach who can develop somebody into a high level of proficiency and somebody who takes somebody who's been selected and show them off. Because that's essentially what you're doing, right? When you take guys who have been on SWAT teams or on special missions units or in special operations and you train them and then you tell everybody how awesome you are, you're not, can you teach a 50-year-old house mom who's never shot, can you teach her how to shoot? Mm-hmm. I don't know. That it doesn't mean that you can, right? Can you teach her how to fight? Can you teach her how to grapple? Can you teach her how to take somebody's back? Probably not, because you just don't have that experience, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm getting off track here.
No. I think you're doing great, man.
So the book, so if strength is, if we can agree that strength is important, then the rest, the book is just how to do it optimally. And optimally means in terms of loading, in terms of moving the most amount of weight, using as much muscle mass as possible, generating as much systemic stress as possible to just make that fundamental adaptation happen. Mm-hmm. And it's not anything groundbreaking. It's, sets of 5.
It's not sexy.
As heavy as possible.
That's why nobody does it, man.
And you just, it's too simple. And you just, it's not, people don't not do it because it's too simple. It's because it's really fucking hard.
Yep.
Yeah, it's really hard, right?
True. Simple concept, not so simple to do.
And that's an interesting thing to talk about, because why is it hard? It's because you are literally stressing and improving your most fundamental attribute. That's got to be hard, right? Otherwise, it's not gonna do anything, right? So, is it hard to go do CrossFit? It's hard in a way, but it's not hard in the way that it is to add 5 pounds to your deadlift and another 5 pounds and another 5 pounds. Mm-hmm. Is it hard to go roll 5 rounds? Yes, it's hard, but it's a different kind of hard than having to eat your protein and sleep enough and then add another 5 pounds to your squat. It's a different kind of hard, fundamentally, because you're literally changing your physical existence by doing this stuff, right? So anyway, the book is the technique for the lifts. Just, beautifully explained in terms of mechanics and in terms of fundamental anatomy, fundamental physics. Really hard to argue with, doing the lifts the way that we teach them and the way that we present them. And then the third aspect of it is a method for learning the lifts. And then, as a parallel to that, a method for coaching the lifts. Mm-hmm. So it's a pretty complete thing. I think the last thing to consider there is because there's that teaching method and the coaching aspect, we also have a pretty robust and pretty well-developed way of developing coaches and thinking about coaches. So that kind of fits really well into my my whole life preferences, right? When the first time I went to a seminar and experienced coaching, I was like, damn, like this is the kind of coaching I want to be doing, right? And becoming a strength coach has made me a better jiu-jitsu coach and fighting coach, self-defense coach, and firearms coach, and vice versa, right? Because it's like, they all feed each other, right? So developing the eye and seeing somebody like doing something as they're pressing a trigger that's going to affect the trajectory of a bullet, like that develops your eye in a way that like not a lot of things can, right? So there's the coaching aspect, there's the analysis of the lifts, there's the basic program, which when people say starting strength, that's all they think about. It's like, okay, squat 3 sets of 5, do bench and press 3 sets of 5, deadlift 1 set of 5, add weight to the bar. That's all starting strength is. And it's really not, right? It's actually the whole approach to getting stronger long-term forever, right?
I love that. It makes it's absolutely obvious to me why John and the rest of the crew here at Combative Summit would want to be associated with that, and you, with everything that you've just said. Like this is, okay, so you set the table. So what I want to know is, John, how did you come across this dude? Like, and this, how did this happen?
Long story short is we fought each other. It's a joke, but it's also true because we actually met at Craig Douglas's class called Edge Weapons Overview.
Oh, interesting.
So, and we got into that, and it's one of Craig's most physical classes. And, I told you about the starting of the Combatives Association Facebook group. Nick joined it one of these days because, I mean, a lot of people, they know Nick for being a very competent strength coach and everything he's done with the Starting Strength brand, but they really don't know of like how capable of a martial artist and a shooter he is as well. So he's always had this this broad picture as far as the strength being the underlying condition that expresses the skill, whether it be fighting and shooting. It's like the platform that everything else is launched from. So he joined the group, and we interacted quite a bit. We exchanged, we shared ideas, and we met at the course. And yeah, man, we've been very good friends ever since. Very similar ideas, even though we're coming from different places. And that led to the summit. We had a couple classes together. Nick put together the Lift Shoot Fight Camp through the Starting Strength brand, and we actually, over the course of 2 days, taught the 4 compound lifts, had people shooting, had people fighting. So he's a 40-pound brain in terms of like coaching and developing people, and with a 500-pound deadlift. So that's pretty damn cool. Like a person like that, we couldn't create. They had to be born. So it was, he was like, hey man, thanks for plugging me in. It's like, no, buddy, you fit in here. So having the meta view as far as like the larger picture, the things that fit the wide cast within the population, and also having standards for professionalism. Like we don't really see that too much in this business. Starting Strength really does it the best. And even their language that they use for the barbell, like I've been able to transpose to what I was talking about, like strength is about expressing force against an external resistance. I mean, that's defining a fight right there. So I think their language is very, very appropriate to what we do. Very applicable. The whole thing, it kind of reminds me of the thing that Matt Larson would say when he tells people to train at Combatives. It's like, we're not going to win the next war because we're good at Combatives. We win because of what it takes to be good.
Right.
And what it takes to be a good coach is a skill you can transpose against any physical skill.
Yeah, I love, I'm kind of listening to both of you talk, but particularly you, Nick, with regard to the process, but also that you got a 40-pound brain and a 500-pound deadlift. That's what John said there. And the process to do that, the things that you learn in order to be able to do that 500-pound deadlift, like that's not something you can just go into the gym and do, right? That takes time.
Yep.
Right. It also
by the way, 500-pound deadlift's not impressive.
Yeah. I got you.
It's higher than that. By the way.
Easy
for
day,
the people listening.
Somehow
We're thinking about the normals, all right? The normals.
Somehow, not the mutants like you. Not the mutants like you, Nick. But
just warming up.
Yeah.
No. Yeah.
The context, that is, in order to do that, you have to go through a process. And you have to spend a lot of time in that process.
Yep.
And inside that process, what you learn, you make mistakes, but but you have successes and there's failures and there's application of different things under kind of figuring it out. Like your journey in terms of becoming a coach or entering into the coaching world and the experiences that you had and how you got there is very familiar to me.
Yep.
Right. Very similar background. And I think most of the great coaches I know, that's a very familiar story to them as well, as they've gone through their journey and they had to do that thing for a long time to understand how to back out of it and kind of simplify it for people so that when you see it simplified after having gone through all that, man, you really respect that because you had to probably overcomplicate it a few times and, get buried in the weeds on stuff, major in the minors, if you will, to understand how much value or importance you needed to put in that minor thing.
Right.
So go back to the major things. That sound familiar?
Yeah. There's one of the. Let me start this by saying a couple things. So, if we can get like one message across, and I think this is kind of universal in terms of what goes on here at the Combative Summit, the people that are involved in the Combative Summit, and then in my specific world, your guys' world, and then people watching this, it's the value and importance of good coaching. It's underrated, right? I know like I'm self-promoting there, but
say it, Nick. Keep saying it for me.
Dude, nothing irritates me more than because let me make another point. I'm a mediocre shooter in terms of like people who can actually shoot. I'm a mediocre jiu-jitsu player in terms of people who can actually do jiu-jitsu. Like I just went and competed at Master World. I lost in the first round, right? So that's where I'm at. I am a mediocre strength athlete. I'm not a strength athlete, but in terms of people who are strong at my size, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like so. But I'm not saying that I haven't worked hard to get to get my brown belt, right? I haven't worked hard to pass the certifications that I passed or to shoot well, right? What I'm saying is that there's levels in terms of performance, and people who perform at a very high level automatically get a level of authority in terms of teaching and coaching that they don't deserve. And nothing pisses me off more than going and spending $800 on an instructor course from a very well-known, like very well-respected firearms instructor, and it's the worst class I've ever taken in my life.
It's an $800 mistake.
Nobody learned anything. The people who were performing okay were performing worse at the end, and then at the end of that, like most of the class is like excited that they basically wasted their money. So you basically got to hang out with the dude who you.
You need to be to justify your decision and your weekend spent.
Exactly
and
right.
Your money spent.
No, I think.
That's what I'm saying. They're like, this was great. Of course it was. That's what I expected to get. Like it was $800.
Exactly. Yeah, I got an ass kicking and told that I suck, and I didn't really learn much, right?
Good.
Right. Yeah. So
it's working. It's working.
So
it seems right. That seems right.
So people need to evaluate not that high performances aren't important. Like there needs to be a level of competence and a fairly high level of competence. I mean, if I were to compare myself to the average person shooting, I have to be way, way better than them, right? But if I compare myself to people who I respect, for example, I'm like nowhere near them, right? So you still have to constantly be pushing, constantly be striving. But that same thing applies to coaching development, and people forget that, right? So it matters who you learn from. It matters in terms of how good you're going to get and what they can do for you, and the less predisposed, the less self-selected you are, the more important that is. So one of the things that we we talk about all the time is how to get this stuff out to more people. And you can't do it by taking guys who are really, really high performers and can't teach or coach somebody who's never done it before, right? It's easy to coach people who want to be there. Like jiu-jitsu is a great example. Like for years, people that walk into jiu-jitsu school, they know exactly what they're getting. right? So, I mean, they're self-selected in some respect, right? It's like they know what they're coming to get. It's a harder job to get somebody who doesn't have any idea what it is. They're walking in the door, they see a bunch of people in pajamas wrestling around and grunting. It's like, and now you're going to convince them to come in here. That's a serious skill.
It's a hard sell. Yeah.
And not only that, it's a hard sell. It's a serious skill to be able to keep that person and make them good, right? And the same thing applies to barbell training. The same thing applies to shooting. It's far more impressive to be able to speak to somebody who doesn't know that they need it, right, and make them proficient. And in order for things to grow up, it's like the things have to be tailored to that group. And there's that's not a watering down, because if coaches look at the fundamentals and get better at teaching the fundamentals and transferring knowledge at a fundamental level, all of their coaching improves, right? And
so does their client.
So does their client base, and so does their income, and so on, right? So there's a lot of value there. I mean, if you guys have ever talked to anybody who's done things at a very high level, it's like somebody goes through a selection, like a high level selection of some kind. The first thing they're going to do there is go back to fundamentals and just hammer the shit out of fundamentals for a period of time, probably a long period of time, right?
Sometimes a miserable amount of time.
Yeah. And it's like, and I can see a guy being like, why am I doing this?
Yep.
Like,
that's what I mean.
Why am I, like, this is the most ridiculous thing. Like, I learned this 10 years ago, but this is what it's all about, right? Because you can't build skill on top of nothing.
Of poor fundamentals.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the difference between a champion and not a champion is that person that can execute the fundamentals on demand under pressure every single time.
Yeah, it's almost like a cliche, but it's true, right? I mean, it's like...
so that's funny you brought up that word, because that word's come up a couple of times on a couple of our podcasts, and that is the cliche, right? The word cliche, and how it gets that, and the other word is buzzword, which they're interrelated at some level. But how you explain that, and that grouping together of words that do matter, oftentimes gets, I guess, pawned off, or people look at it as it is a cliche. And the reason they're saying that is because they don't truly understand what those words mean when they're put together, and or the process that it takes in order to make that happen. Yep. And so that's a lower level of thinking. But what you really did was you just broke it down into its most fundamental pieces right there in that sense. Yep. That bothers me more than anything when I hear people go, oh, that's just buzzwords. You're just trying to get attention, or, that's pretty cliched. What about it is cliched is what I want to know. Sure. And usually when you ask about the second question from there, you quickly reach the end knowledge point of the person that's making that statement. Yep. Unless everything else around that was bullshit anyways. Right. So, but if you stayed in the conversation long enough and you made a commitment to it, you'll get that pretty quick.
That's right. So, that's right. Yeah, one of the things that we demand out of starting strength coaches as we're certifying them is some depth, because it's not easy to teach fundamentals. Like anybody could, and people do this all the time. You could pick up starting strength, or you could go to our YouTube channel and watch the videos. It's very straightforward. I mean, it's not hard. The whole thing was designed for people to do on their own. Like when Ripito wrote the book, well, initially it was for high school coaches, and then he realized the situation with high school coaches, and then he rewrote it to appeal to just the guy in the gym, right? So the whole thing's designed to, like... Which
is oftentimes the guy that's in the high school weight room coaching the kids.
For sure, yeah. It's like,
and I'm so happy he kept his hatred for high school coaches.
Not even hatred. It's like belligerent disdain.
Mark makes no bones about it. That's so funny.
But it's straightforward. It's simple, right? It's very, very simple. But in order to know and teach it and coach it well, you have to have a fairly deep understanding of the fundamental concepts and how they integrate together. So again, it's like this concept of integration that fits in really well with combatives. It's like, it's not about just the individual pieces of shooting, fighting, right, on the ground, standing up, and ranges and stuff. It's the integration that's important. And you can tell the guys that understand the integration and the guys that only understand their little piece of it, right? So yeah, you've got to have a depth, and depth only comes from true depth only comes from understanding and really knowing the fundamentals and how they integrate together.
Man, I mean, you set up so many things. I mean, I have lots of questions now, as we kind of shift this into the integration between combatives, and there's obviously jiu-jitsu there that we've talked about so much. It comes up a lot, right? And it should.
Yep.
It's relevant, right? With the strength training.
Right.
And the other components of building human performance.
Yes.
Outside of the skill, which is jiu-jitsu or whatever, firearms, whatever. But let's keep it martial arts focused here, but obviously we're talking about the integration of all the things. That's what the Combative Summit is.
Yeah.
So when we talk about that, just with regard to the human performance side, when we're starting to build strength, starting to build power, speed, capacity, all those other components in the hierarchy that exists there. And yes, we're agreed, in case you were wondering. We're agreed on the strength piece. Yeah. Yes. Strength is important.
Right.
It's foundational. It is fundamental. If you want to live longer, get stronger.
Yeah.
Right?
And if you're confused about it, just like, agree to wrestle to a guy that's twice as strong as you.
Yeah, that's one. That's one way. Even the Google doesn't really argue this too much.
Yeah, even if he has no skill, it's like it's not going to be fun.
Right.
It's not going to be fun, and it's not going to be fun.
Yeah, and there's a limitation to that, right? Like when all things are equated, right? If you have the guy that's the black belt, right, and he's wrestled the same, he's competed in the same tournaments and maybe beat the same guys or whatever else, and you have those two guys standing on the mat, they're the same height, the same weight, they learn from the same instructor.
Same skills,
right? Equated across the board. The stronger guy is likely going to have a very large advantage.
Right.
Again, looking at the hierarchy of how this stuff fits into the bigger piece.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example. I mean, when we did the ECQC, we had John Wellborn, right, former NFL athlete. He didn't know shit.
That was one of the most
fighting.
terrifying weekends of
But
my life.
I did not have a fucking good time.
Dominating,
it was
right?
awful.
Yeah.
Like he he wasn't able to win. But fuck, man, was that awful? That was not fun at all. So it's like when he was
John grabbed my gun because it was him and I on the retention drill.
Yeah.
And so Craig sets us up where like I've got a gun, he's got a gun, I hold his gun, and then he holds my gun.
It's not fair, dude.
When he grabbed it. There's very few times in my life that I've been the small guy, right? Or the weaker guy. And he grabbed it and I was like, fuck, this is bad. This is real bad.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, right? So John had zero experience with grappling at all. He'd done some striking, so he had good, and obviously NFL player, right? So
he knows how to manhandle.
He's good on his
somebody.
feet. He knows how to move. He's physically very, very well-rounded physically and very strong. But I went with him in Evolutions twice, and I luckily won. But it was tough. But here's the thing, man. So he left and he signed up like the very next month for jiu-jitsu, and it's like, and I told I think he told me that at some point.
You're going to be in big trouble with the next ECQC,
he's like,
man.
He's like, you're the reason I signed up for jiu-jitsu. And it's like, well, I'm never grappling with you again.
Ever. Yeah, we're done.
Never again. Because after 6 months, it's fucking over. Right? It's not going to be a good time for any of us. So.
I mean, that's a really good example and story for why this makes sense, right? For the grappler or, the combatives, the person that's exploring this world of combatives. And
he's also the reason I started strength training.
Is this a true story?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, you're not joking.
Yeah.
Going in, were you a black belt when you took the ECQC?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So I was a new black belt, but still, I was like, that was awful. I cannot have that happen to me publicly. Like, no.
Right. Which is an important thing to have that, again, that wake up moment, like the whistle hadn't even blown yet, right? Yeah. The get it on hadn't even happened yet. You knew as soon as you felt what you felt, you're in big trouble, right? This is gonna go. Yep. It's the game of life, and in this case, the ECQC, while they're trying to make matchups there to keep people safe and give people a look and all those kind of things, is not a weight class sport.
Right.
And
neither's life.
Yeah, neither's life. So I'm saying to John's point, like, well, I've been on the mat with a lot of guys before, maybe some bigger guys, but not one like this.
Never felt anything like that. That was like, okay.
All the skill in the world.
Yeah.
All the skill in the world, or maybe not, because, whatever. But
this is a gorilla who's intelligent. Like, that was awful.
It shows up, right? And it stuck with you, and you made some decisions, some life-changing decisions, right, to get in the strength thing. And then obviously that puts you guys together in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of the performance picture. And by the way, if you don't mind, let me just say a quick thing, because we get a lot of shit for like the emphasis or our like depth or experience with jujitsu. Especially, I mean, you saw here. I mean, I would say that there was very few guys who don't have at least some experience with jujitsu, right? Yeah. And you'll hear instructors say things like, "We're not, that we're not doing jujitsu," which we're not, of course. Right. Or even I've heard some instructors who don't really know what they're talking about. It's like jujitsu is different from this. Now, if you were to pick one martial art, so to speak, or one thing to do, you would wrestle. Like that's for self-defense. That's what you would do. The truth is that, unless you're a kid or a teenager or really, I mean, unless you're going to do it at school, there's not a place to wrestle.
Right.
And also on top of that, wrestling is so competition focused that it specializes into the rule set of whatever wrestling is. Now, still, because of it being wrestling, it still carries over really, really well to everything else. But a 35-year-old guy is not going to go start wrestling.
Not signing up for wrestling.
There's no place to do it. And you're going to get beat up. And if if you're insane and you go to like the local college, they're gonna beat the shit out of you, right? Mm-hmm. And you're not going to last very long. So what we have left is jiu-jitsu, which is good enough from a wrestling perspective, especially if you can do a couple of things to in your own training, and you can do this on your own during warm-ups and stuff, just a little bit of a shift in your way of doing things, that it's good enough. But the point being that if you're going to have depth in something in terms of a martial art, something that is going to round out your ability to integrate, again, the word integration, to integrate everything else, it needs to be a grappling art of some kind. Mm-hmm. And there's just no way around it. So the pressure, John always talks about pressure and how, pressure is the key to everything, the key to improvement. But the pressure that you get from day one, the technique that's layered on top of that, and the experience, just the sheer number of hours you spend on a mat with a fully resisting opponent, you can't find anything else that's going to come even close to that. So, so like at this point, because I used to kind of say the same thing. It's like, okay, self-defense day, jiu-jitsu day, we're learning how to fight. When we're doing jiu-jitsu, we're learning how to fight, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes as you get better, you get into some cool, flashy shit, and it's fun and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, man, we're trying to hold somebody down and do things that they don't want you to do to them, right? So, I think jiu-jitsu will always be a big part of this. And by the way, on the other side of that, people in this organization have introduced jiu-jitsu to more shooters and non-shooters and self-defense types, I think, than probably, they get one exposure to a Craig Douglas weekend and they're like, well, fuck, I got to go do jiu-jitsu because I just got my ass kicked and I had nothing. Like I had no skill, no base. Yep.
Well, it might be the whole, it's not the whole answer, but it's a really, again, going back to solving the problem of not being able to be competitive. We should start with the stuff that makes the most sense, where we get the most return on investment and the most value, and like the strength training.
Yeah, and in terms of
jiu-jitsu training makes sense.
And in terms of return on investment, it's like the safest way to train too. I mean, nothing. I'd
agree.
Nothing's 100% safe, but what else are you going to do?
You just made the wrestling analogy or the wrestling comparison.
It's unsafe. We used to in my Krav Maga days for my advanced class, we put helmets on and fight, right? That's nobody's going to do that. Right. It's unsafe. Ultimately, you can't do that 4 nights a week.
Right.
But you can grapple 5, 6 days a week.
It's even more on that is it's accessible too. Just about anywhere you go in the United States. I mean, you'll be able to find.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's accessible and it's popular and people want to do it too.
Going back to the 35-year-old that's just getting started, I kind of take this back to the youth as well, and understanding that with all the things that you might get your kids involved in, and this is outside of the lessons that jiu-jitsu can teach you about life and yourself and in terms of growth. It's the thing you can take with you all the way through life.
Right.
You can always stay with the jiu-jitsu, but if you start with baseball and all you do is baseball, at some point, for the 99.9999% of people, baseball is going to end.
Right.
You could go play like in a softball league or something. That's not baseball.
Right.
Yeah. But my point of that is jiu-jitsu is that thing that you can take with you. And it can keep you strong to some extent. It can keep you conditioned. It can keep you mobile.
Yep.
Certainly, the longer you stay in it, the more propensity there is for, getting some injuries or some repetitive use.
Just like anything, exactly
stuff,
right.
just like anything else. Right. So, yeah, from a safety perspective, I find it to be very safe in that sense, too, is that you can continue to practice it for forever.
Right.
But I think the thing people kind of... Like it's so obvious that most people are oblivious to it. Jiu-jitsu is also adaptive. Yep. Like we don't have to just do jiu-jitsu with this kind of end state. Like we can also adapt it to make it to where we're trying to get up, or we're trying to hold this person, or we're trying to use a wall. We can start, figuring out like, okay, I can use my legs here to now introduce a gun. So I think the idea that people kind of like they just see what's going on, like, okay, that's the only strategy, or that's the only end state. Like, no, there's other ways to adapt this. Like, just because like the training happens to be live ground grappling primarily, that doesn't mean that like, okay, that we can't do dirty moves or we don't understand. Like all of a sudden, like it's like people see that kind of training and think like, oh, we're just going to shut our brains off. And just like, that's it. Like we're just going to,
lizard brain, alligator brain.
So I think, I think people just don't give they don't give enough credit to the fact of like the participants are being thoughtful or they are being deliberate. And I think that's kind of where the coaching piece comes in, because like most of the training we see, any physical skill, it's mostly an anti-intellectual process. Like the people are there just listening to the guy or the gal. That guy or gal didn't really put the respect into the craft where they gather that depth, and they're kind of, they're given a carbon copy.
Right.
And like the people listening, they're not really questioning what they're learning, because this is an authority figure in front of me, right? For all intensive purposes. And, so like what we're talking about as far as like the whole professionalism and standards for coaches and instructorship, that encouraging people where they can continue to do things and develop in my absence, because they're equipped with their own experience and their own perspective. That's really where the instructorship is really, that's where the magic is happening.
The gold standard is, can you affect a behavior change in the person who you're coaching? And that could be in a group of 30 or 40. Right? If 3 of them leave and change some shit about what they're doing,
that's success to me.
That's huge. How many times do people go to a seminar, class, whatever, and they just like, oh, that was cool, take a couple techniques with them, and then that's the end of it, right? So yeah, the absolute gold standard is like, did this experience, this class, this session, whatever, did it change something about your approach tomorrow? Right.
That has to be the intention.
Yep.
Right. That's come out so many times with talking to a lot of the other coaches or instructors that have been here this week or weekend. And that is the intention that they have. It's very clear. And so we had the Q&A after tonight where people got to ask questions. And I think it was probably Cole and several other people kind of came over the top on it to drive the point home. And it is the intention. I think it was Cliff, actually, now that I mention it. Like, you have to come with a purpose today. Like in every single time, it has to be a purpose, and understand the pieces of that purpose as well. And don't make it anything more than that today. Right. And then evaluate today on today, and then we'll get to tomorrow with the same, not the same necessarily intention, but with the thought process and going into it that way. That was a really interesting answer that you provided, on top of Cliff being Cliff. With what he said, and we'll leave that up there. You had to be here. Come next year, you can hear Cliff. One of the challenges that I found in fight sports, if you will, but it's in all sports really, if you spend a good deal of time around this, where there is maybe a skill involved, right? And sometimes, cycling, right? There's maybe some level of skill there, but maybe not as much, obviously, as a lot of other things. But when you look at the thing that they're doing, they think they need to be doing more of the thing to get better at the thing, and they're not pulling the constituent pieces apart and understand what are the things that go into this. And you described that very, very well. You set it up very, very well with, well, if we can agree that strength, right, whether you're a cyclist or a combatives athlete or a fighter or whatever it happens to be, is important, and that's of primary importance for many, many reasons, as you've already described, then how much time are you dedicating to that and building that as it relates to those things, but also your sport and how you can improve or express the skill.
Right.
And so getting folks to step away to go, I should probably be doing more strength training. Where do I put this in? And how should that look for me?
Yep.
And that's where it gets muddy, and that's where it gets weird a lot of times. That's where it gets misapplied because it is misunderstood.
Yep.
I want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great question, great point. It's actually very simple. It's very simple, but in practice, it's not easy, right? So like a lot of things, it's simple, not easy. So the truth is, you cannot serve two masters. You can only serve one master. You have limited recovery resources, and most people are not going to make the habit changes that they need to make in order to sustain a training pace that involves heavy barbell training, which is making you stronger, and at the same time sustain a heavy skill-based training, wrestling, grappling, whatever it is. Things like shooting aren't as demanding physically, right? But let's stick with like a physically demanding martial art. So, something striking related, something grappling related. So there's a lot of demand on your body that you're exposing yourself to, and that all needs to be accounted for.
Yep, right? Every bit of it, every rep, every set,
yes,
all of that. Yep.
Yes. So what people tend to do is think about the problem and then think about a solution, and they characterize that solution as the ultimate solution that's never going to change. So one of the things that I try to do is get people thinking in terms of processes, because all this stuff is very complicated, right? You have all of these skills that you have to learn. And on top of that, you have to remain fit. All right. So to make it even more fundamental in terms of the conversation we're having, like fitness is the most important part of being capable, right? And being capable, in my opinion, means like being able to move, being able to shoot, being able to fight, and being able to just do the things that you need to do, right? So the one attribute or the one skill in the entire picture, like the foundation of that is fitness, right? If you can't get into a fight that's longer than 3 seconds because you're gassing out or you don't have the strength, you're not effective, right? You're just lucky if you survive that, right? So if we're serious about becoming effective, then fitness has to be a part of it. And fitness has to be the thing that's, again, universal. Everybody needs to be improving their fitness. So if you take fitness and then you break it into the fundamental components, it's strength and conditioning, right? So, and that's it. Everything else is skill. Everything else is skill. So let's ignore any time, because you're already doing an activity, you're already doing a sport, you're already learning skills. So anything that sport requires, you're getting it from the sport, right? Except for in very, very high levels, and that's not anybody. I mean, that's people who we typically, you don't see. They're making a lot of money, in other words, right?
Right. They're making a living on this.
Yeah, they're making a living on it, right? So, so we have strength, we have conditioning, we have the skill. So let's leave all the balance, all the agility, all that stuff to the skill practice, because it's specific to the skill. There's no point in trying to mess with any of that stuff. So we're left with strength and conditioning. So conditioning, again, mostly taken care of by the activity that you're doing, unless you are at a high level of skill, right? So if you're a black belt, you're a brown belt, rolling doesn't really give you a conditioning adaptation anymore. You're very efficient in your movement. Now you can ramp things up, but then there's a trade-off there in terms of potential for injury and stuff like that, right? So that's a time where conditioning can be appropriate, right? It's like you're a brown belt, you're a black belt getting ready to compete. You think you're trying to plug any holes you've got. So yeah, we're going to add in some conditioning, even though you don't need it in day-to-day rolling, but you're about to do a competition. So maybe you want some conditioning. So that conditioning happens off the mat, because the only way to do it on the mat is more intensity and the potential
risk for exposure.
Yeah.
Right.
Risk for injury. Right. So what are we left with? It's strength, right? Because if the activity takes care of the conditioning, and again, that conditioning is specific to the thing that we're doing. And I don't really need any additional conditioning. Most of my effort should be spent on the strength side of things. Now, the problem is that extra conditioning, extra any other thing you can do in the gym, it'll give you more wear and tear, but most people aren't going to push themselves hard enough to really screw anything up. On the conditioning side, or on, messing with machines or functional training or anything like that, they're not going to go hard enough to mess anything up. And the loading is not hard enough to really to really cause a problem in most instances, right? There are insane people who can really mess themselves up, but generally not. Strength training is fundamentally very, very systemically stressful. So since that's the case, you got to figure out where you can take away and add, right? So in other words, if you're the guy who does jujitsu 5 or 6, 7 days a week, and you decide that, okay, like my progression in terms of getting better at jiu-jitsu is slowing down. And this is the time when guys are like, what else am I going to do? I got to figure out something. I got to go to the gym.
Yeah, they do something drastic.
Because the first thing they realize is I'm not like everybody's stronger than me or whatever, right? So, or the white belt came in and this dude's like big and jacked and he's like, oh, I can't deal with him, right? So they decide they're going to go to the gym and get stronger. So let's do it in the way that's going to keep us out of the gym as much as possible, right? So let's not figure out a way that's going to keep us in the gym for 3 or 4 hours, because that's not what we want. That's not what we're here to do.
Efficiency.
Yeah, we're here to do other things, right? I'm not talking to people who like spending 4 hours in the gym. Like, I'm talking to people who want to be in the gym as little as possible and get the most return on that time spent in the gym.
Minimal effective dose, maximum.
All that stuff. Yep. Yeah, all that stuff. So it's like, it needs to be really stressful. It needs to be effective so that you keep doing it, and it needs to have corollary benefits, secondary or tertiary benefits that aren't just force production. Like, you know, and these are related, right? But as you get stronger, your joints get more robust, and you're more resistant to injury, and being able to do things longer,
resiliency,
longevity, resilience, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's a really nice package, but it's really difficult. So,
what's difficult?
It's difficult in terms of doing it. It's not fun. It's not like anything you're doing in your thing you actually enjoy doing. And it's hard work. It's very, very hard work. And you have to do things outside. Like when you leave the mat, you're
not done.
Well, when you leave the mat, you've gotten what you needed, and you may think about it, but you're like kind of done with that until next time, right? When you leave the gym and you've done a heavy barbell workout, now you got to go eat 30 grams of protein,
rehydrate,
you got to think about your next meal. You got to make choices about the rest of your life if you want to keep progressing, right? So anyway, to answer your actual question here, if you're the guy who's doing like 5 days a week at jiu-jitsu, if you can stand it, just back off, right? And spend a short amount of time, a relatively short amount of time, 3 months. Like I'll tell guys, like, give me 3 months where you're rolling twice a week. Maybe take it easy on the mat. You know, the white belts, blue belts, you got to tell them just chill out a little bit and let's train hard in the gym. And then all the recovery factors, like try to get them to eat more, get them to sleep well, get them to eat more protein, and let's see what happens. And almost universally, they're not going to do as well as somebody who only lifts, obviously, because they're doing other things. But it works fine. It works just fine, right? So, and guys who have been doing an activity for a long time, who are already conditioned, you can just plug and play barbell training. It's fine. Like you get a brown belt or a black belt, it's like, just keep doing what you're doing, add barbell training, you'll be fine, right? Because it's the jiu-jitsu or whatever is not stressful anymore, right? You see what I'm saying?
At that level, yeah. I think just kind of backing up for a second, I want to clarify a couple of things. I'm going to throw some buzzwords at you. Yeah. So what I heard you say there was, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the advice that you'd be giving somebody in order to build some more strength for the guy that's going 5-6 days a week on the mat. And it's like, what do I have to take off the plate, right? Instead of just adding one more thing on that adds to this recovery debt that I likely might be already in if I'm already not eating enough and resting enough and all of that, would be, all right, well, we can toggle some switches here, or and do some dialing of some things at the same time, not asking you to turn it all the way off.
Right.
So let's dial the thing a little bit.
Exactly.
And so one of those things might be frequency. The frequency of how often you're on the mat.
Yep.
So that's one way. So that would be how many days, right? Or instead of 2 times a day, it's 1 time a day.
Exactly.
Because I know plenty of those guys, right?
And that may be enough if that's the pace you're used to. I mean, if you're cutting it by 50%, dude, that may be enough.
That's quite a bit, actually, right? Like in my mind, right? When I think of, I'm thinking percentages, 50%'s a lot.
Yeah.
It depends, but it feels like a lot. The second thing would be your duration that you're actually spending on the mat. So maybe instead of spending 2 hours on the mat, spend 1 hour on the mat. So we've decreased the volume there. And then the other thing would be the intensity. Yep. And that is, instead of going in there and in going, if you're training, again, going back to a Cliff reference, and maintaining longevity, he said, maybe go at 70%. Understand what your 70% is and do that. But and also pick your training partner,
right,
which is a solution, right? Or, to solving that problem. Know who those guys are that want to go 100 all the time, or their 70 is your 90, right? And pick a training partner that works best for you in the time that you need that to be. Even if you are also adjusting your frequency and your duration out there, but let's manage the intensity of how much work you're putting in there. Pick your training partners. Have that conversation with your training partners when you're there. Hey, man, this is what I'm here to do. Have it ahead of time. So who's willing to do that with you or not. Right. These are all solutions to the, let's adjust here with the jiu-jitsu. There's many ways to do that. Nobody's telling you to switch that off, but maybe that is the right thing, right? Maybe just backing off of it altogether and not doing it. I'm not suggesting that, but it could be. Maybe it is the right solution.
Maybe, but my thinking is like your hobbies, the things that you enjoy doing. You're not. I don't ever want to discourage people from doing them.
Same.
And by the way, I understand as a jiu-jitsu coach that like mat time is very, very important. So
for your head, your heart, your soul.
Yeah, like people tell me like, should I get stronger before? I get this question all the time. It's like I'm thinking about self-defense. I'm thinking about jiu-jitsu. Should I get strong first, or no? Go to jiu-jitsu like yesterday and start. And then the strength training is going to just be a part of it. So go ahead and start because you need the experience. You need,
and there'll be some adaptations there, anyways.
Yeah,
right?
for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. So anyway, it's like take off as much as you can stand and then layer the barbell training on top of that. If you want to do it effectively, though, you've got to take it. The big part here, because I think everybody can kind of understand what we're saying, but and even implement it just fine. The problem is that people have a really hard time changing their habits, and it's going to require, if you're adding this kind of stress to your body, you need to change your habits. You need to eat. Every meal has to have a bunch of protein, and you've got to probably eat extra meals and all that kind of stuff, right? So that's the in terms of the training picture, long term, that's the hardest piece for people because the PRs are exciting. People are going to get excited about adding weight to the bar
all the time, right? All the time. So there's I think the other thing is I was talking about like head, heart, and soul type of thing. There's an emotional attachment to it, right? Which is tough for people. So when we're talking about changing behaviors as a coach and getting them to change that behavior, it's also then for them to understand or have awareness about the emotion that they have attached to it and what's the risk benefit of what I'm going to be doing and how does that make me feel? And if this is where I'm trying to go, should I feel scared? Should I have fear for doing a little bit less or a little less intense or a little less frequency? We talked about those dials that you can work with. That has to be understood, and you have to sit with that for a minute and understand it, and then try it. At least you have to walk into it, and then be committed to it at some level to understand whether it's working or not. I had a question yesterday, just in the same vein. When I was working with a buddy Aaron over here from In Extremis Performance, and I was just kind of doing a little survey in the room, hands up type survey. How many days are we spending in the week in the gym working on our fitness versus how much are we spending on the mat or whatever working on skills? And some of the answers kind of surprised me, like in a good way. Like, yeah, man, I recognize the strength and conditioning piece, how it fits together. I'm spending a good amount of time, 3, maybe 4 days a week in the gym, not the mat, but in the gym, in the traditional, weights and bars kind of thing. And I'm doing 2, maybe 3 days on the mat. I was like, oh, wow, I actually didn't expect that at first. I thought I would hear something different. But then I realized, like, this is a very intelligent group of people. I think they're a little sharper than the average cat.
And not only that, they're grown-ups too.
They've graduated from the 3rd grade.
They have jobs and they have wives and husbands and kids. So
they're mature.
They're mature, and that schedule kind of fits most people's lives pretty well. Like your spouse will allow you to go to jiu-jitsu twice a week. Yeah, right.
This is a very real thing.
Yeah, if you're going 5 days a week, she or he is gonna start getting pretty pissed at you, right? So it kind of tends to work out nicely for grown adults that it's like they end up usually about twice a week at jiu-jitsu. And then the gym is the gym, right? They're usually going to go to the gym and they'll do that before work or lunch or something like that. So
it's interesting you say that in this example, because the guys that were telling me that were the more mature, and I mean that in physical age,
Yeah.
right? As well, but it ultimately got to a younger cat who's in here who maybe doesn't have as much liability or responsibilities
Right.
in his life. He's like, no, man, I'm on the mat 5-6 days
Yeah,
a week. And what he
exactly.
said was,
Is he single?
probably.
Yeah.
So that's
Dude, that was me in my 20s, all through my
Yeah.
20s.
because that's that point you
Yeah.
are in your life, which is great. Go
Right.
do that thing. But back to the question is the follow up to that he gave me was, well, when I go to the gym and I start lifting weights, I get hurt.
Yes.
Right. And some of the stuff that I've had in the past starts to show up in
Right.
terms of aches and pains and soreness and whatever. And so I have a really hard time doing that. So he's struggling. He's in that point of like, while I hear what you're saying and I understand what you're saying about the importance of strength, right, as it applies to the things that we're talking
Right.
about, I am having a rough time making that transition because this is what's showing up for me
Right.
in that transition time.
Yep.
And so for me, the first thing that I didn't say this out loud is, well, that's a clue.
Yep.
That's a clue. So I wanted to kind of turn this over to you two guys. I'm going to start with actually you, John, on this one with regard to kind of your answer on that and kind of what comes up for you when you hear that. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, I think what's happening is he's kind of letting the old him get the new him in trouble. I think like I hear that and like, okay, you're deconditioned, you're out of shape, and you're basically trying to start with whatever weight you used to do, and like
You're talking, this is specific to the strength training piece. Got it.
Right. So when I hear that, that's what I think. I'm like, okay, you used to do that weight for reps, and you think that because you that's what you used to do, that's like still the image you're holding, and that you're still going to go into that, and that's why you're. So the old you's getting you and the new you in trouble, basically. So like you need to actually dial it back, like those dials that you're talking about. Actually, like give yourself the time for the adaptation. Like you're still that guy or that gal, but like you got to give yourself time. Like you at least as much time as you took off to get back to where you were. And I think one of the things I like to tell people is like you got to give yourself a little bit of grace.
Yeah.
Like people are so hard on themselves, and like the people who are scared to go start training, they're scared to go, whether it's jiu-jitsu or go into the gym. They think that somebody is standing there staring at them and judging them like, man, look at that guy's form or that gal's form. It sucks.
Nobody gives a shit, man.
Literally
Nobody
one cares. Everybody's busy and they got jobs or things they're trying to do. Like everybody's trying to get in, get the work done and get out. Like no one cares. And I think, when people, they're so afraid of like a loss of social status. Like they're allowing negative emotion to hold back the potential in their life,
right.
To like live happy, healthy lives, whatever it is that they want to do. And like look at this event. I mean, it's a cool thing. The training was great. It was awesome. But really the thing that made it great was that there was such cool people here. And whether they're a grandmaster shooter or a jiu-jitsu black belt or whatever it is that they do, they're all pursuing excellence in their own way. And being around people like that just makes you want to step your level up. And I think like that the social benefits, like that's something that we don't really talk about. And that's the thing that people are really missing out. Like getting around other people that are gonna help them become a better person. Like you're gonna be able to defeat life not because of you're good at jiu-jitsu or you're getting in the gym, but like what it takes for you to get in the gym and get there, it's like that's a degree of tenacity, and that you take that tenacity to everything else you do, man, you're gonna live a better life.
Yeah, I think it's the blessing and the curse too, right? Yeah. Just in terms of like wanting to do it all the time sometimes and the challenges that exist there. And to be fair, there wasn't room to ask the follow-up questions that we all would have in terms of assessing how do we help this guy through his problem.
Right.
But you brought up a good point. Was he single? I'm going to guess that he was one of the younger guys in the room. Not to my surprise, but actually, I expected this based on who I see involved in this whole thing.
Right.
The guys here were the people here were way more mature, both in life and in experience and in like intellect, I would say, in a lot of ways. I don't know if you can equate maturity and in being an intellectual, but my point being is they're thinking through the problem. These guys have already been through all that already, and he's kind of right there in his journey and so forth. So I have a lot of questions, obviously. Well, how many days were you doing your weight training? And obviously the nutrition questions, the sleep questions, the recovery questions, all that stuff comes up. And so we've talking about kind of toggling the dials toggling the switches and turning the dials. So kind of coming back to that, having that a connection to what you just said, John, the way you were kind of working, like you got this community, right? They're driving you to be better. Right. And it can be really tough for somebody to kind of look at that and go, yeah, but if I don't do this right now, like if I don't do the jujitsu, I'm going to get worse at the jujitsu. Right. And I don't want to do that. And I lose social status. Like I can't I'm the blue belt. I can't come back here after making a commitment to the strength training and come back here and have that white belt beat me. I can't do it. And if I leave, that's the consequence of me sacrificing this. And so they're looking at it as a taking away, right? And a sacrifice and a negative versus a positive. I wonder what your thoughts are on that, Nick.
Yeah, I would have a bunch of questions, as you say, right? Yeah. So without knowing the guy's situation, so in other words, making a bunch of assumptions.
We can speculate.
Yeah, making assumptions. He's probably if he hasn't been strength training, he's probably smaller. If he's training 6 days a week, it's a lot, which is great, right? And it's going to be really difficult to convince him to not do that as much. So it would start with basically like, let's decide what you want to do. I mean, you're asking the question, do you want to get stronger or not? And what's the reason for that? So if you want to get stronger, then your options are to either attempt to get stronger on top of what you're already doing. So if you have time for that, great. But this is what it's going to require, right? So in other words, lay it out. Like this is what it's going to require.
Here's the plan.
Here's the plan, right? What are you eating right now? Probably doesn't know, right? So let's
more than probably.
Yeah, let's figure that out. And this is what it's going to take if you want to get stronger and do this. All right. So then the question is, I'm getting hurt as I start strength training. But then that brings up another bunch of questions.
There's a lot of questions.
Are you doing it right?
What does that even mean? What does hurt mean?
Yeah. What are you doing?
What are you doing? Is the technique all messed up? Are you?
I think the thing they don't want to hear is like you keep getting hurt because you're too weak for what it is you're doing.
Could be. That could
for sure.
You could assess that maybe very quickly, but again, it could take some time. Yep.
Yeah. So again, just going back to laying out a process and let's just get started. I mean, that's how good coaching happens. It's like, let's give you something to do by next week and see how it goes. Right. And if that's just, all right, man, you want to go at this, you got the time, you want to attempt it. Let's do it. Let's check, let me know how it goes next week. And then if we need to make an adjustment, let's make an adjustment. Right. But that's assuming that possibly he's got a technique issue that we can work out or something like that. If it's just strictly like he's getting hurt because of the sheer amount of things that he's doing, if it's a young guy, I don't think that's likely, man. That's the thing. That's the thing. That's why I'm struggling with the question, because I don't think it's likely. You're a young guy who trains hard. You've been training 6 days a week for how long? You're you're adapted to that level of stress.
And he's skilled. I mean, I watched him for 2 days, right? Or at least 1.5 by the time he got to us and we was sitting in the lecture or whatnot. So yeah, that I would.
There's something else going on. That we need to understand.
And that's why I wanted to walk down this, not knowing. I don't like to get into hypotheticals and things, but these are the questions that coaches think about. Right. And so that's why I wanted to talk about, like, what questions would we ask? What things would we be examining to be helpful for the person that doesn't have the backgrounds that we have and the experience that we have. And so that they can be led down the path of asking the right questions to come up with the answers, maybe for themselves, or maybe the answer is going to a person that they can talk to that can help them maybe get a clearer answer to their issue.
I definitely have like the standard strength coach answer, right?
Sure,
I have that. I'd be like, look, dude, stop training so often and then get in but that's not realistic. And then that absolves me of the job of actually being a good coach and like
so glad
figuring out the problem, right?
So glad you said that. And that's a really simple, easy answer. It doesn't solve the problem, right? And it doesn't solve the problem in this way either. And that is, again, going back to this is a skilled dude who's been doing this a long time. He's very conditioned. There's probably some emotional connection to this. But you mentioned the work. And the work is, I don't know what his experience is or isn't in the gym. Like, I don't know what you're doing when you're working out. What does that even look like? I mean, and so when I say work out properly, that is very broad.
Of course.
Right? Obviously, when we look at programming, human performance programming, and all the things that go into it. But we're trying to keep this conversation fairly sort of high level and let's not get into the weeds on a lot of terminology and whatever else. The point of this is what you're going to have to understand is, like, if you do, maybe you think you know what you're doing, and you're going to have to come to the realization that you don't. Okay, so there's another realization that I'm going to have to go through, and something I'm going to have to work through both in my head and in my, from my heart and through my body, because, okay, so I'm not very good at this. And then this goes back to the learning the skills, because that's what, when we go in and we start lifting barbells, and you just mentioned this, like in talking about the book, like you have to develop the skill of lifting, being able to lift those weights, right? This stuff could be very new for you. And so that takes bandwidth, right? That takes time, right? And very likely if this dude's an athlete or whatever else or whatever, it's not going to take that much time. It could be a little rough at the beginning, and you need to be prepared for that when you go in there. And, or if you're the other side of it, is like, I did this for years and years, and so I know what I'm doing. I don't know what you did, right? But I did this for years and I know what I'm doing. It may be you may need to give up some of that old belief system about what you think you know to then come back. There's a lot that goes into this, so I don't want to make this a simple problem.
But I think there's some fundamental assumptions, at least that I operate under, that I think are important, and I think it might be good for people to hear. But number one is that it's exceedingly difficult to. I guess the term that the buzzword is to overtrain. It's very difficult to do. There's other factors involved. You're not actually reaching the capacity of your body, right? There are many things you could put yourself through that will prove that to you, right?
Correct.
So that's not the case. You're not actually reaching the hard limit of your physical existence.
Most people never do.
That's exactly right. So that's my assumption number one. So if this dude wants to train 6 days a week, he wants to lift on top of that, it's possible. All right. But let's talk about what it's going to require in order to do that. And his idea that he is, because people do tell me this all the time, that I've reached my potential, or that like I literally can't do it. Like, this is what I want to do, but I can't do anymore. It's like, well, you're telling me two different things, right? So, and by the way, you're not. Like, there's no way. The second assumption is that if this individual doesn't hear an answer from me that makes sense and that is logical, and that, again, pushes some behavior change, pushes them to want to change their behavior, they're just going to go find somebody who will give them the answer they want.
That they want.
And that
validates them.
Exactly. So those are my two base assumptions, because I could tell this guy my answer that I think he should do. And the way I approach that has to be in a way that's convincing, and that's logical, and that it's true, right? I'm not going to bullshit him, and that makes sense to him in a way from where he's coming from. Because if I tell him, stop doing jiu-jitsu, lift for 3 months, get as strong as possible, and then come back to jiu-jitsu, he's be like, okay, cool, man.
Lose him.
And he's going to go talk to somebody else who's going to give him really shitty advice, right? So I'm convinced that I know the answer, but we have to arrive at it together. Like, I have to guide you towards that answer.
That is coaching.
Yeah, exactly right.
That is coaching. I think there's another piece here you mentioned. We were talking about overtraining, and I'm really glad you brought that up. It is a buzzword, right? To some extent, it does mean something, but people apply that to something that it isn't.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. But there's another assumption that I would make, only based on experience. I could be very wrong about this, but I feel pretty confident in saying he's likely undernourished.
For sure.
And as a result of being undernourished, the result of that would be that you're also under-recovered.
Yes.
You are not overtrained. You are undernourished, so you are under-recovered. And if you have an expectation that your performance is going to be where you want and need it to be for whatever those things are, that is not a realistic expectation. Right. And that is something that also needs to be addressed. And you hit it already, which was, if you're going to onboard this new thing, this is going to be a key ingredient to any kind of success. If you do adopt what I'm leading you down the path of here, and still trying to do the BJJ however many days per week.
Undernourished is a great way to put it, because you can actually tell me if you guys agree with this, but you can be eating too much and be undernourished, especially in a training context, for sure, right? So, and that happens all the time. So it's not just fundamentally, weight loss, weight gain is a calorie. It's a
calorie surplus,
thermodynamic situation, right? Ultimately, like it's a little more complicated than that, but ultimately that's the deal. But in terms of recovery, for sure, it matters. So nourishment versus just food is a different thing.
Yeah, we break this all the way down. Again, we're not going to do that on the podcast. You break it all the way down to the cellular level. Like, and what does nourishment mean? Do you have, I'll keep it high level,
Keep it
but
simple.
I think this is what people need to hear. I mean, what you're saying is, are you eating enough? Are you in enough?
Micronutrients, right?
Yes. So we can break this down very simply in this. First off, are you getting enough calories, right, to sustain the demand or meet the demands that you're placing on your body? And just because you're eating more calories than you should be doesn't necessarily mean you're eating enough.
Right.
I want to make that distinction.
Exactly.
Because then we can break it down to, okay, so if you're eating enough calories, what does the macronutrient profile look like? Because if your macronutrient profile, the proteins, carbs, fat stuff, like if that doesn't equate to the demands that you're placing on your body, that then puts you in an undernourished state.
Right, exactly.
Right. And then obviously there are the micronutrients that come along with that and hydration and things like that. But again, without getting into the weeds, that is how you can be overeating and undernourished and under-recovered.
Yes.
So not overtrained and then not performing poorly or certainly not meeting, right, your potential.
Exactly.
And I that is the thing that I think gets where it gets really muddy and really confusing. Because now you're talking to me about yet another thing, right? And another behavior change.
But
right?
again, to keep it as simple as possible, it's like you gotta start, right? And if this is one of my issues with people who start talking nutrition, because they want to educate everybody on all the macronutrients, how they work, and give people splits, and then talk about micronutrients and talk about all this entire picture. When what we need is behavior change, right? So what are the what's one or two fundamental things that we need to be worried about? It's calories and protein. Until we can get those at least close to dialed in, or even headed in the direction of dialed in, there's no point even discussing anything else.
Agreed, 100%.
Nothing.
But again, I'm just going back to the crowd that we had here before, and I think they're a little bit more intelligent than the average cat, right? And they get this. So when you say that stuff, they understand it, right? They don't understand it at depth, but they understand this makes sense. Going back to making a good logical explanation. So, a good logical explanation for why this makes sense to me, and so I'll think about making these changes. That's the first step. You got to get them, like you just said, taking the first step in the right direction. I agree with you 100%, is that then it very quickly gets overcomplicated.
Yes.
And it doesn't need to be like that. So yes, in terms of like what's going to have the biggest impact, let's make this simple. You got calories and protein.
Right.
That's going to be very helpful. But I think, again, a lot of it, a good deal of it also has to do with just having a higher level, a different level of awareness. Just like you became aware when you went up against Wellborn that, oh shit, my strength isn't good, or isn't good enough. Yep. Let's just say for me and what my needs are and what my realities are now, what are the steps that I have to do? Each time you can kind of layer on this next layer onto the hardware, right? Yeah. You have this software and you got to kind of build it one piece at a time. And so getting people to take that step to understanding, sometimes it how much information you give somebody is based on the assessment that I'm making while we're talking and the questions that are asking. So I want to be clear. Like, so if he's listening, I don't know how to use his name. Like, there are some assumptions we're making and speculation here. But I'm only doing this because I'm taking that back right now because I know he's not the only dude in the room that's doing that, right? Yep. And I know he's not the only person in the room that wants to be better and is struggling with this better in a lot of ways. Right? Again, that's the nature of martial arts. He wouldn't have been here this weekend if he didn't want to get better. Yep. And so in terms of putting that out there, if that can help resonate, if that resonates with somebody to take that next step to want to know a little bit more, just like the undernourishment thing as an example, like, shit, I never thought of it that way. Yep. Like, again, if I expect to get better at this at any level, or even I just don't want to hurt anymore. Right. I'm not interested in the strength training thing. I'm not going to do it. I'm still going to come fight. That doesn't change anything about what we said with regard to any of that stuff. Agreed or disagree?
Agreed. No, 100%.
Right? Yep. Yeah. So these seem to be, for me, and obviously, in talking with you guys, these are common things. So I'm going to actually ask the question instead of making any assumptions or saying from my own experience. What are some of the other common things that come up sort of in the martial arts world as it relates to people adopting or understanding the importance of the strength training? Have we missed anything?
I think we just have a lot of guys who are they're still hanging on to kind of like old ways of thinking.
Lifting weights will make me slow.
Well, not just that, but like they want to keep the art pure and untouched, right? Like you have judo schools that are still doing calisthenics the way Jigoro Kano said to do, the way he said it in 1882. As if we haven't learned anything about strength and conditioning in the last 120, 40 years or something. And they're doing it because they're not being thoughtful. They're being adherent to what it is that they're doing. They're just worshiping that art as their martial art. They're worshiping it and they're making it their entire identity instead of like the actual improvement.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of that, or you have the jiu-jitsu cliche of, strength doesn't matter because you got,
skill.
Yeah, right. And there's some truth to that. Like, again, right, we do recognize like, okay, like, yeah, maybe John Wellborn wasn't a great fighter, but I knew that like I wouldn't actually want to fight him.
I don't want to fight that guy.
Right.
Well, I mean, everybody admits, whether they realize it or not, that size and strength matter because there are weight classes.
Right.
And also on top of that, they're also like they ban steroids.
Okay.
Steroids do one thing.
Right.
They make you stronger.
Right.
Right. And then it's like,
so does it matter or not, guys?
You're talking out of both sides of your face.
right. And then like nobody's like the guy who's the blue belt world champion. Like, yeah, that guy's mom doesn't even remember he won it last year, right? Like everybody, but like whoever's the absolute black belt champion, like open weight, everything, everybody remembers it. And guess what? It's usually a big fucking strong guy.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
and when it isn't, it's really like it's a big deal. Like when Mighty Mouse,
yeah, dude.
I think it was last year. It's a big deal. Everybody knows about it because it's such a weird thing to have this.
Doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah.
Beat this big dude. It's so unusual, right? In other words.
Yeah, and to throw like the whole like another buzzword, right, or cliche that happens in the tactical world is like force multiplier. Like, say that again slowly.
Right. Think about
right.
This.
And they're thinking about it in terms of just the weapon. It's like, no, like your ability to express force against external resistance, whether it be strength, whether it be fight skills or anything like that. That's a force multiplier, buddy.
By definition.
Right.
By definition.
Right.
Okay. So changing gears a little bit here. So, and I don't want to get too in depth. I could talk to you dudes for hours on this stuff. Like, but it's been a long weekend and I want to be respectful of everybody's time and, including ours, because we've got things to do as well. That said, it's funny. So CeCe might jump in on this just with regard to when we came in the other day. You said something to me. We weren't here 5 minutes, and you came over to me and you said something. You remember what it was?
That everybody looked the same.
Everybody looks the same, right? So explain. Can you talk through that?
So I went over to Scott and I said, Scott, how come everybody looks the same? All the guys are like, shoulders elevated and protracted and forward head positions, and a lot of them were bald as well.
Short haircuts.
He's the only one with hair.
The way they walk too, and then the gait that I noticed as well. A lot of people had that right leg externally rotated. So I found that very interesting as far as just body positioning and posture.
Yeah, this is the nature of doing the thing, right? And the repetitive movement and the thing that is the thing. And those things in some way make you good at what you're doing, right? In a lot of ways, when you think about body positioning and even the things that you're talking about pummeling, right? Or, well, we won't get into this. We won't get into that part.
You guys got to come next year.
Yeah. We won't get into all that. But when you're rolling with somebody that's a little bit more muscular, a little bit more thick up top, right? And when he's in side control, right? And he drapes that big ass shoulder across your face versus the bony guy who drapes his shoulder across your face, that feels different. Right. You react different. You respond different. It is a different thing. But the point of that is like she's, again, coaches, human performance people, they're looking at people and how they move all the time. We're nerds. We're freaks like that. It's just what we do. That is our sense of observational awareness all the time because it's what we're doing all day long. And so she's picking out these things and it's very normal for us to do that. But again, it's the nature of the thing. So going back to addressing the strength and again, addressing the injury. And I don't want to make this all about injury prevention, but we absolutely know that the stronger you are,
more resilient.
You already mentioned more robust your joint structure are, your tissues are, all of those, your nervous system, all of those kind of things that help you stay resilient, injury-free. Resilient, meaning like if you stay in this long enough, you're going to get, you're going to sustain some things. And so how quickly can we get you back into the game? Well, the better platform, to that you've had built, right? The better platform you have to go back
Sure.
to respond to this stuff. So, we look at that stuff, and just with like regard to the barbell training and their strength training, and when they choose to do this strength training, making this a smart program,
Yep.
right? A smart program that not only helps them get stronger, but can address things for them that will increase their longevity, can increase their resiliency beyond just the strength.
Right.
And so I wonder, and it's been a long time since I read that book. I do know it went through very well how to do these exercises properly, not just to build strength, but to keep yourself safe, right? And then build these movement patterns that follow you for everything.
Sure.
They're foundational, fundamental movement patterns. I wonder how you you think about that, not necessarily tell somebody, but think about that in terms of this context.
In terms of keeping longevity, resilience.
Those kind of things, and helping people keep with. Let's just talk about joint mechanics, right? Yeah. I mean, in what we're looking at, what you mentioned, like with shoulders as an example, those elevated, protracted shoulders, right, which starts to limit or reduce, let's just say, I don't know, I hate this word, but optimal shoulder mechanics. Yeah. What they're doing is optimal maybe for what they're doing, but that doesn't necessarily transfer over into the game of life long term.
Absolutely.
With all the things we have to
I
do.
understand what you mean.
Yep.
If there's something you're going to do that is going to, it's going to alter the sort of bias that your body is going to get into because of either bad movement patterns or just the things that you're doing a lot, right? So like, a grappler, I mean, you can tell when somebody's a wrestler, you can tell when somebody's a grappler, not only because of their ears, right? But because of how they move and how they walk. You can tell when somebody's a striker. Like a lot of times you can tell because of how their shoulders and how they carry their hands and stuff like that. But just take a second and think about how much time you're spending as a grappler in this kind of curled up position on the ground, exerting a lot of strength and energy on the front of your body, right? Just either curled up, holding somebody, framing, doing all these things. So it makes sense that your body kind of defaults to this kind of curled up position. Not, in my opinion, whatever. It's not the end of the world. Yes, there's going to be a potential for things to go wrong. But if you layer that on top of just the amount of training that you're doing, right? Now you've got this picture where it's like, your posture's fucked up. Also, you're like, you're getting tighter, and also you're training a bunch, right? So what are we going to do in order to fix that? The truth is that like just movement in and of itself is not going to be enough,
right?
Because think about how much time and how much force you're experiencing in these positions. So if there's anything that we can do that's going to help that, anything that you do like acutely, like right now before training, where you're going to stretch, you're going to move around, you're going to do some whatever mobility stuff or whatever you want to call it, that's a transient effect, right? You're only optimizing what you already have, in other words, right? So in other words, I'm not going to do the splits. Like right now, I could bend over and like spread my legs and get so far, and then 10 minutes later I can get significantly deeper, but I'm not going to do the splits, right? Because I've never done them before. I've never pushed it. And that's the point. You're not going to get any more than you already have out of something that's not loaded, in other words, right? So in order to actually fundamentally change your posture, the way your muscles operate, the way your joints operate, it's got to be heavy enough to counteract all of that stuff you're doing.
You have to have a stimulus, right?
You got to have a stimulus, and there's nothing more efficient at doing that than heavy deadlifting, heavy squatting, heavy overhead pressing. And I heard this multiple times this weekend. And I had this conversation with the guys because, the shoulders thing. They're like, man, I always thought that pressing overhead, because this is what they say, is what everybody says. As soon as you have a shoulder injury, like don't do anything heavy over your head.
Yesterday. We just went through that yesterday.
You need to do things heavy over your head. There's a very limited band of situations that you cannot press over your head. Almost everybody else can, right? I'm much quicker to dump the bench press than the overhead press. And that's kind of the opposite of the conventional, even medical wisdom, which is ridiculous, right? So you need to press overhead heavy. You need a deadlift heavy. You need a squat heavy, because that's what's going to, at least, if you're in that situation, it's going to be the most effective at undoing any kind of any kind of those movement or postural issues that you may be concerned about. Right?
Yeah, I love that answer because what we really do, again, going back to the basic foundational movements that you're talking about, like if you had to pick 5, right, or 4 plus 1 or 2, if you're doing some auxiliaries or whatever, however you want to look at it, you want to pick, and because of time, efficiency, and we know effectiveness of loading those types of things, whether it's a 5x5 or however the program is designed. You want to pick the thing that's going to do that. There's 2 caveats there. One is if applied appropriately, right? So again, it's how are you doing the movement? So the movement's important, the movement being, let's call it the deadlift, right? How you're doing it is important, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but it is important that we're trying to do that well. And there's a way to get there. And you may not be in a position to do that really, as good as the next guy right now, but we're going to get you there over time. The other thing, the other caveat there would be, not caveat, but thing to address is heavy. Heavy's relative, right? How do we know that? And there are ways to figure that out for you. Like what is that? And also managing the heavy, right? Yep. So how heavy is too heavy, right? And how heavy is enough, and how heavy isn't heavy enough. So there's things to learn there and kind of gauge. Yep. And if we're applying the movement properly, right, and we're following some general principles that are not overcomplicated, right, to put that extra 5 pounds on the bar a week or whatever, and do it properly, it is not that difficult. People overcomplicate this shit all the time. It drives me up the wall. It doesn't need to be. We talk to a lot of people and see a lot of people in the gym every day that need a lot of things. And so are very limited because they have zero capacity. Right. They have effing no strength, right? They don't even know their right from their left, half the time. So like they look like a walking nightmare again. They're getting through life and you're just looking at them going, oh my God,
how have you gotten this far?
How did this happen, right? Like this looks like it took work, to get here. So there are things that can be applied, but if we had to break it down into its simplest component, it really is not that complicated.
Yeah, and the reason that barbell training is the answer is because the tool, the implement, the barbell is ergonomic. It's the most ergonomic thing that you can. I mean, until we get some kind of awesome new technology, there's nothing that I can think of or that anybody has told me that allows you to move and position your body as naturally as possible while loading it incrementally as heavy as possible over time, right? So in other words, like adding a barbell to yourself doesn't fundamentally change the way you move. Like squatting, pushing on things, and
you move the way you move,
and picking things up are the most fundamental movement patterns that humans can do. Like even if you can't walk, you can still like get up and stand up and sit down, right? So they're fundamental movement patterns, and the positioning under the bar, because it's a barbell, doesn't change the way your body operates, right? So like if you were to take a log, like a strongman log, like that thing is, you hold it like this and it's like this big around, that's an implement that actually changes the way you normally move, right? But if you overhead press something, I mean, you're just overhead pressing and the bar is narrow enough and it fits in your hand well enough that it's not fundamentally changing the way your body moves. So my point being that, people want to equate barbells with the sport of powerlifting or the sport of Olympic lifting. And I'll have people tell me all the time, I was like, well, I was thinking about if I should start doing powerlifting for my jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, what are we talking about? Like actually, because powerlifting is a sport, right? And powerlifting is the sport of lifting the most heavy weights that a human being can lift. And because of that, they use the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. Those are the heaviest things that a human can move. There's through a full range of motion, obviously, right? So it just happens to be that those exercises are also the ones that we use for strength training because of those reasons, right? If those are the ways that you can express through a human body the most amount of strength, then those are also the exercises that need to be used in a strength program, right? So in other words, if you've got a imbalance, one side to the other, front to back, whatever, it doesn't make any sense to you can't produce enough stress to manage that imbalance or correct that imbalance unilaterally. You've got to load your body the way it's designed to move and exist, and then move through a full range of motion with a heavy enough weight that, any compensation that's happening on one side just comes up in order to manage the movement and the positions, right? So, so that, there's like a lot to this because it's not just we prefer barbells because we're meatheads. It's like, it's actually the best way to do things if getting stronger is the way to do it, right? And in terms of the ranges of motion that you're doing, they're complete ranges of motion, right? I mean, the way you teach the squat.
Ideally, that's what we're trying to
doing
get
it correctly.
Right,
if you're doing it correctly, right? They're complete ranges of motion. They're not full ranges of motion, right? You're going through a full range of motion when you roll, for sure. Like your knee, your elbow, all that stuff's going through full ranges of motion. Your knee under a heavy load doesn't need to go through a full, complete range of motion. Like the value of an ass to grass squat is 0, right? Unless you're catching a clean in the bottom of a front squat, right? So the value is in moving the joint through a range of motion that's complete, where all of the structures, all the muscles, all the tendons around it are doing as much work as possible and then coming back up, right? If you go any lower than that, then you're losing some of the benefit, because you're moving longer than you're moving more than you need to. So you're reducing efficiency, in other words, right?
You know what I'm finding interesting, and I'm really kind of saying this out loud for the first time, but as I'm hearing you guys talk about like what's the conventional wisdom and then like what you guys like obviously are doing as far as like a practical and a process focused method to developing human performances, I'm hearing like a battle between like science and religion almost.
Oh, that absolutely exists out there. Yeah, it absolutely exists. I mean, much like a lot of things in society, right? Like there are some, again, I think the religious piece of that is somebody has adopted somebody's doctrine, right? Of whatever that is. This is the only way to do this. And it isn't, there's again, we've figuring out lots of ways to solve problems this whole weekend. But without the lack of fundamental knowledge, right? You and wisdom of some level, you're never going to get there, because people always want to kind of retract back into the group. There's safety in numbers, and
but there's there's that dogmatic approach. Like you just talking about the overhead press, and like you've heard the saying, squats are bad for your backs, or deadlifts, and overhead press bad for your shoulders.
It's funny because people accuse us
don't work out anything.
Yeah.
It's funny because people accuse us of being a cult all the time. Sorry, but here's the deal: you can't be a cult if all your information's out for anybody to analyze, right? It's like, look at it and tell us where it's wrong, right? So
like there's a lot of stuff there. Again, like I would, again, if done properly, there's so much utility, right, in that barbell. And what I mean by that is, if utilized properly, and what I mean by that is people, again, when you say the squat, there's a few ways to do that, right? You can manage things differently if you have some limitation.
For sure.
But what people end up doing is they use the limitation as an excuse not to do the thing, right? And then that leads to the religion piece.
Right.
Well, because of this, that's why I use only kettlebells, right? Or I use, whatever. Instead of that, like, because my doctor said I shouldn't overhead press anymore. I made that exact statement yesterday, man. Not because I don't even know if that was in that presentation, but I'm only saying that not because I need your agreement, but because that is truth. Like, people need to be pressing overhead, and you're right. There's a very limited amount of people that probably shouldn't be doing that. And it's not that they can't do it. It's probably that they shouldn't, because how much sense does this make based on whatever their condition is and predisposition is for that matter. So the barbell does allow a lot of utility. And so for people listening to this, when I say that word utility, that are in that camp of, you guys are a cult and this is starting strength bad, right? Kettlebell's good, or whatever the thing is, right? Go back to that. I would challenge them to think about, okay, well, if that's the way you want to go down there, could you not do a single arm overhead press with a barbell? Yeah, I can fix it to a lot of things and do a single arm press. So don't tell me there's no utility. When I say there's a lot of utility in the barbell, I'm thinking way outside the box now. You could apply it to a lot of things, but going back to accessibility, right? And the basic premise and foundational things that you've said there, principles of how that bar can help you in those basic movements, dude, like there really isn't a lot of argument there, right? But if I had a garage, right? And so in terms of accessibility and time, space, and, my excuses why I couldn't do this, or all the things, if you throw out all my doctor said's and, this guy over here says this is bad or whatever, just strip all that away for a second, and you needed something. You had something. You only had one thing. Like, I'm choosing a barbell all day. Yeah, I know what you're about to go ahead, say it. Yeah.
No, go ahead, tell the story.
No, you tell it. Like you tell it.
Going back to the days when we were riding our bicycles.
Yeah, like we were.
Yeah.
But this is before CeCe and I really knew one another. We were sort of figuring one another out. I think it's to set the story up.
Yeah, so we were doing a lot of tri-distance, I guess, training as far as, triathlons, and we had a lot of time on the bike.
Yes, John, I used to do that. That was like 60 pounds ago. Yeah, he's looking at this.
Because you look
Okay,
like
now we're
you look like 1
literally-
mile is a long distance run for you.
I had the same thought when I saw him one day before we started riding. But anyway, when we were talking shop, he asked me, he's like, so, if you were to open a space, what is one piece of equipment that you would want to have? And I immediately said, I would want a barbell.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much utility in it. Again, from a space perspective, from a cost perspective, from all the things. It's while it may be intimidating for people to think about, once you get that thing in your hand, it's a freaking bar. That's all you're dealing with, right? It does a few things really well, but it's super simple. You just slide stuff on it, you slide stuff off of it, you do that stuff. Yeah.
And I was going to say, not every barbell has to be a 20-kilo barbell.
Sure.
So, barbells come in all different sizes.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, we have aluminum bars that weigh 12 pounds. We have 15-kilo bars. We have 20-kilo bars. There's all kinds of different things.
So you can meet your client where they're at, right?
Or meet where you are as an individual who's trying to do this stuff.
Right. And one thing, too, I just wanted to clarify for the listeners at home, like the barbell is cheap in terms of utility as far as versatility, but it doesn't mean you guys should go and buy a cheap barbell. That's the one piece of equipment that you absolutely do not want to cheap out.
And in terms of equipment, it's not that expensive. A good bar is $300.
Right.
It'll last forever.
So to give perspective, absolutely.
Yeah. I
because there's a lot of people that would be willing to sell you an expensive piece of shit.
Right.
As Tommy Boy would say.
Right.
You want to put a stamp on the box that says a guarantee, whatever it is. It's stamp of butcher's, something like that. Right. Anyhow. Okay, guys, that's probably a good place to kind of transition here and get things going. Again, the purpose of me wanting to sit down with everybody here, but particularly you, Nick, was because I knew you would deliver a message that would make sense. I think there's some authority, right? Obviously, there. I think that's important, right? You came right out of the gate with kind of dispelling a few things and pulling some of your frustrations about, who's giving information and where people are getting it from. That was excellent, because I think that's something people struggle with, especially like, I've given everything I've got to jiu-jitsu and now I'm trying to learn this new thing. Where do I go? Yeah. That's how the podcast started for me in a lot of ways. So, looking for that information. So, putting that out there for people to kind of marinate on and think about, and then in not dumbing anything down, but trying to keep it, and it's very simple components, right? Understanding that, but also coming over the top and saying, this is hard to do, right? It's simple in concept, but it is hard to do, which is important. But again, when I think about combatives guys and jiu-jitsu guys and the fear that they may have, like, jiu-jitsu is hard too, right? It's hard too. And so to think about that. Like, it was hard when you started jiu-jitsu. When you came in as your white belt on your first day, I don't care how big and strong you were, it was hard. And it was hard that way for, at least 4 to 6 weeks before you started to build some conditioning and maybe learn a few things and, all the things that come along with that. In 4 to 6 weeks, doing some resistance training, some organized, like, well put together, like, resistance training program, especially for somebody that's been doing jiu-jitsu for years or whatever, the results, like in strength, but also the byproducts of building strength and muscle, not just in the performance piece, but all the other things in life with regard to your health, right? Like, if body fat percentage or body composition, if that's easier for people to think about, all that kind of stuff, you can see some tremendous results in that amount of time. So, and think about that. That's a flash in the pan if you look back at your entire jiu-jitsu, or combatives career. Like, it is not a large investment of time.
There's something about that too, is like, this is what I think about, like the language in starting strength, when they say like that novice linear progression. From doing strength training, doing martial arts, and practical shooting, I realize and I notice that novice linear progression is in every physical skill.
Sure.
Everything.
It's the law of diminishing returns.
Right. You got it. And you mentioned something earlier about working with the person, or the person that puts out the information, that's been a great athlete and it was endowed with certain things already, and all of a sudden they're now the expert that's delivering the information, and sometimes doing that in a very poor way, and people buying into it in whatever. I also look at this as like in wanting to work with the person that has no experience or whatever, and helping them achieve the things that they need to achieve. And that's hard to do sometimes if you're not an effective communicator, right? And you don't really know what you're talking about and all those things. But those are the people, and what I mean that it's like the client side of things that I love working with because they are fresh. They're malleable, right? We can really see. Like you take that person out on the firearms range for the first time. They're scared of the gun, whatever else. Then they're scared of the bang, right? And then they're confused because we have so much sensory overload. You know, they come back the second time. There's a little less of that, right? It doesn't take 10 times for them to be remarkably better at the thing. It only takes a few times. And it's the same again, from the human performance perspective, all of these same principles apply.
Yep.
And so when you walk into the strength training game, like it's also a trap sometimes. It's like, oh shit, man, like that, I don't know, that 20 kilos or, you know, that I have on the bar this week, or last week, feels super light this week. Let me throw another 20 kilos on each side or whatever. And it's like, no. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's go through the process. It's like, well, hey man, I just submitted that blue belt over there. I'm a white belt. Give me my blue belt now. Pump the brakes, bro. Like pump the brakes. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. So as ridiculous as that sounds and kind of joking that way, it's the same thing in approaching this. And I think that's a kind of a confusing thing for people sometimes as they're entering into this thing. But guys, we got to wrap it up. Nick, thanks so much for taking the time, man.
Thank you.
You gave me some history you filled in some gaps on the history with starting strength I did not know about. It was really good and refreshing to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, you know, so to speak, from guys that are inside the company. Going back to, you know, the company start with the franchise side of things, it was 2019. That turned out to be a really rough time, you know, as we went into 2020.
The worst time to start a franchise company.
Absolutely worst time. When we think about lockdowns for people that aren't putting they're doing the math on that, like it was only a couple of months later when everybody's new gym was just getting shut down. And anybody that's opened a new gym or a new business knows those first few months, that first year, those first 3 years are critical.
Yeah. And most of our established affiliate gyms on the coasts didn't survive.
Right. I have friends. I had a friend with starting strength gym who did not survive either. It was a very, very tough time. And it wasn't, those are things outside of their control, which angers me still to this day. But that said, it is still alive and well, right? And you want to, just real quick, you gave me some numbers yesterday.
In fact, we sold franchise gyms during that time. It just shows you the demand and the really the passion of the owners, of the franchise gym owners who are willing to do this in like one of the craziest times we've ever been in. Right. You know, and just believed in it. So man, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think we're 28 gyms open right now. Mm-hmm. We have 20 or so affiliates around the world, all the way to Singapore and Korea.
Asia's a huge market.
Yeah, huge Brussels. Market. We've got affiliates everywhere. We got coaches all over the world. But in the U.S., we've got about 20. We've got 15 affiliates or so, and then 28 franchise gyms, and I believe 40 sold. So
yeah, so these are clubs that are looking for locations and getting ready to be built.
It's some phase of their process.
So you're a very busy dude. Right, you're a very busy dude trying to help those folks out. I'm sure with all the questions they have and all the things they're going to need to do. John, as per usual, man, this has been an amazing event, and you always bring the energy, which I really appreciate, and that can be incredibly tough to do at times. This has been an energy suck in so many great ways. Like, but the capacity that you've had for this thing, you know, all the way through from start to finish has been amazing to me. So again, like, I don't know where this kind of lands in how we drop this summit series, if you will, of episodes. But bro, you've been awesome. So thanks, man.
Guys, I'm thankful you guys are here. Iron Sights Podcast, you guys are exactly the right people to come here, ask the right questions, and like, we couldn't have created a better podcast host as far as like being able to cover this and doing it with the dignity it deserves and ask the higher level questions. God, thank you. Thank you for being here. CeCe, thank you for being here.
Thanks.
Well, that means a ton. I appreciate it. CeCe, as per usual, thanks for entertaining me and listening to me yap in your ear
Thanks for
yet
having me
again.
come.
Yeah, I'll try and do my best to shut up as we get on with our night, guys. The only thing we have left to do is sign off, and then we got to get a picture. So thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
you.
Thanks.